Culture is forming one way or the other, friend. Either you're intentional about building it or it's going to build itself. So either way, culture is a thing and culture is going to be built in your workplace. But what are you doing to direct it in the way that you want it to move and the way you want it to go and grow? That's what's key. Hey leaders, welcome into the Leadership Sandbox. I'm Tammy Bond, your host of the Leadership Sandbox podcast, and excited to have you join me today as I get adjusted here in my studio. Today we're going to be diving into a topic in the sandbox that I think you're going to appreciate as you are navigating the first part of this year. And it's really going into what we've been talking about for the last few weeks around culture. And of course, tying that leading the culture with your communication approach so that you're communicating what you want to build. And that's what I want to challenge you with today. So as you kick off your shoes and you get ready to step into the sandbox, I want you to grab your pen and paper and I want you to write down numbers 1, number 2, and number 3, because I think you're going to take away, my goal is that you're going to take away 3 things that you're going to want to take action on, implement, or ask questions about in your leadership journey and with your team in the coming weeks. So let's get ready to step into the sandbox. Let's take the time to set the intention that we are here to grow into that next level of leader just for us. I'll see you on the inside in 3, 2, 1, let's go. Hey leader, if you're navigating tough conversations and it feels like a struggle, I want you to know I've got you covered. I've got your back. I've created a communication starter pack designed to give leaders and managers the tools that they need to communicate with confidence, clarity, and real impact. So I want you to head on over to bondgroupenterprises.com and grab your starter pack today. It's time to lead conversations that matter and get the results you deserve. All right. So this episode, we're going to take a deep dive into how you as leader can intentionally shape your workplace culture through clear, effective, and powerful, impactful communication. We're going to have some actionable insights that we're going to guide you through to understanding what your role is in building culture, because culture is forming one way or the other, friend. Either you're intentional about building it or it's going to build itself. So either way, culture is a thing and culture is going to be built in your workplace. But what are you doing to direct it in the way that you want it to move and the way you want it to go and grow? That's what's key. So why is it that culture, from my perspective, starts with communication? Because you are intentionally communicating, speaking to what it is you want to build. And what's interesting to me is that the studies show 86% of executives believe workplace failures are caused by ineffective communication. Well, cool, leader. So how about you be the other side of that and actually be the part that fixes workplace wins, right? Fixes the failure to a win by effectively communicate. So how do we do that? Because culture isn't really what you say, but it is more about how you act. It is about what you say and what you follow through with and how you communicate that. Because let's remember, communication is both verbal and nonverbal. And leader, you set the tone. So if you're not intentional with what you're communicating about your culture will develop by default. And often it develops in ways we don't want it to. And then we're playing catch up and we're chasing our tail to try to get it to fix it versus being intentional on the front end. And companies with strong cultures, the studies are clear that they see about 4 times higher revenue growth, retention rates are increased, their turnover rates are decreased because they have strong, healthy cultures that people want to be a part of. So what I want you to do today is I actually want you to take a moment and I want you to think about what is one cultural value that you want your team and that you want to amplify this week. What's one cultural value? And if you don't know what those are, then that really is your first step to identify the cultural values that you hold and that you want your team to model with you. You want to define that for them in simple terms, communicate it to your team in simple ways that they can understand it, and then model it. So it goes back to what's the value. And so for us here, like, we cultivate excellence. That is something that I am very passionate about. It's something that I want the team to do with everything that we touch and do here at Bond Group Enterprises. And why is that important? Because that cultivating excellence is really about how we model the work that we do in such a way that others are inspired and aspire to model as we do the work that they do. When I go into work with teams that are broke down and feeling broke, busted, and disgusted, or leaders that are frustrated because their teams aren't performing at the level that they want, then I want to make sure that I'm modeling that, but I'm cultivating that excellence of delivery for me so I can pull it out of the leaders that we work with. And it's modeling the very behaviors. It's a value that I have about modeling excellence. And it comes to cultivating that. And that's what we have as a core pillar as part of our value system here at BGE. So I can talk to the team about what cultivate excellence looks like. And I have behavior-based questions that I also asked to the team, but I also tie it into conversations that we have on the regular. What does excellence look like for this? How do you know you've got it when you've got it? The simplest of questions that y'all hear me repeat on the weekly basis. But I do that so that you can apply them yourself, so you can raise up that level of excellence in your own leadership. So when you identify one cultural value that you want to amplify this week, define it, communicate it with your team, and model it. Let's then track where you see people shifting and adjusting to align to that cultural value that you're setting. That's being intentional about the type of culture that you're wanting in your organization. So let's talk about the top pitfalls, the top 3 pitfalls that sabotage your culture in your workplace. One, and probably the biggest one, is mixed messaging, especially mixed messaging across leaders, from one leader to the next. And the team is like, who do I listen to? Who's on first? What's on second, kind of thing. So an example is, you might say that work-life balance is important, and we set that as an intention. I actually worked with a group a couple of years ago where, oh yes, we want work-life balance. And then I'm getting in church on a Sunday morning text messages of things that they wanted me to tackle with them, or questions that they had. I'm like, hold on a minute. Firstly, Sundays are my family day. The weekends are my family time, but Sundays are my sacred day. And when I'm at church, y'all, do not text me about a question that you have that you want me to tackle before we get back into our meetings on Monday. Like, no, no, no. So if you're emailing your team, this happened several years ago in an organization that I worked with. This was before I escaped Cubicle Nation. And we had a director that was notorious for getting up in the middle of the night and sending everybody emails. And so it was right when the Blackberries were all coming out. Now, for those of you that don't know what that is, because you're too young to know, go Google it. Blackberry is a thing. It's not just a grapefruit. And they would have their phones or their Blackberries on ring mode or ping mode, so that when a message would come in from Mike, they were there to get it, and in the middle of the night. Yet we're saying, oh, your family's important to you, work-life balance matters. Not if you're emailing people in the middle of the night and expecting them that they need to take action right away. And now he would say, I'm not asking anybody. That's just when I'm working. I'm not expecting anybody. Yeah, but let's audit our communication on that one, and let's reframe it to people, because what you're stating doesn't match what's happening and people are confused. And that mixed messaging is a big pitfall, and it impacts your culture in a negative way. So one simple way: be very clear with your messaging and make sure your other leaders are all aligned as well. That's very key. If you have 2 vice presidents both communicating different outcomes or goals or expectations to the same team, that's going to frustrate people, and that sabotages the good culture that you're wanting. The other way that we sabotage culture is being silent on core issues, core challenges, avoiding those tough conversations when they come up, when we need to have those bold conversations about a behavior or about an issue, and we avoid them. That silence speaks volumes. And so I want to make sure that you aren't being silent, and you can use the situation behavior impact model to address those pressing issues at the behavior level instead of staying silent on them and hoping they resolve on their own. And let's also put a timeline on by when we're actually going to address those issues and not stay silent, because that silence, much like your mixed messaging, leaves people wondering. For you as the leader, they're wondering about you. They're wondering about what you're committed to. They're wondering about what they're supposed to do, all of those things. And that starts to spin out in people's brains. And that leads to the water cooler conversations and the parking lot conversations. And people don't need to waste time on that. That's not a money producing activity for you, right? That's not something that's going to produce revenue for you. That's pushing people in the opposite direction. So refrain from staying silent. Stop staying silent on core issues when they emerge. Be willing to have the bold conversation. Be willing to have the tough conversations with people. Tie it to the behaviors and the impact so that you can get to the expectation and address it. The third element is overloading people or overloading your team without aligning to the goal. Rolling out too many initiatives without explaining the why behind it is the easiest example I can give of how we sabotage culture. We want to tie every initiative, every new initiative back to the culture that you're wanting to build. And I want you to use this. We're doing X because it supports our value of Y. When you can use that simple formula, we're doing this new product launch because it supports our value of equipping our customers with the latest technology to support their fill in the blank issue, right? Whatever that issue is you're solving, right? What are you solving for? What's the value? And that gets to the why we're doing it. The other thing I want you to do is I want you to kind of take a bit of a look at the whole picture of the whole year. What have we rolled out so far? What do we plan on rolling out? And communicate that in advance as much as possible so people are prepared for it. That way they're not feeling like, oh, here's another change and here's another change and here's another change. That means that when people start to feel that overwhelm and that overload, we're not communicating our end the way that it needs to be. And we're not casting the complete vision that needs to be as well. Some of these are super simple. And some of y'all are going, yes, Tammy, I get it. However, when I have calls with team members and I go in and do an assessment with a team about where they're at and what they see as the challenges are, and I hear that communication is not positive or communication is left is always is our top issue, or that we feel that we don't know what our expectations are because they change all the time. That's a communication issue. That's impacting people's ability to see themselves as succeeding in the role that they're in for you. And if you want to keep them there and keep them hidden in that way, or keep them operating out of a less than or a lack mentality, then that's the culture that you're going to create day in and day out. So when I repeat these things, it's not because I don't think I've talked to you about them before, but I also know that we've got to see things and hear things, 8 to 10 times before we actually try it on and adopt it for ourselves. So my hope is the repetitive piece. The simplistic view of it is that you'll actually correctly take action on it. But do pull a Tammy and go in and have the conversation about where are we winning at these things? How is our culture? Where are we winning at that? What do we want to be different? And have people share that. Bring in an outsider to have that bold conversation with your team if you don't want to be the one to do it, to take the pulse and get the temperature of where people are and what we want to create. And are we moving in the direction of the positive culture that we say that we want? So I want to now give you some easy to implement culture building communication strategies. Storytelling with impact is by far one of the best things that I can tell you to do to build culture. Share stories of team members who embody the cultural values. When you identify what those are and you know what the behaviors are and the outcomes are from those cultural values, and you catch people doing it right, share that story. Highlight that team member who went above and beyond for a client, or did something that really showed that culture of service that you want in your organization. End your next meeting with a cultural story spotlight, right? That helps the team to hear oh, this is where we're doing it right. And then I would also say too, make sure that you mix it up across people. So it's not always the same person. But if Sandra is the one that is consistently nailing the culture and she's really doing a great job and she's always the one you want to put forward in your cultural spotlight, that's cool. But then you want to ask the rest of the team about who they caught doing something right that fit a value for the culture that we're wanting to build. Let the team get involved in that. That's a huge way of building that through storytelling. It creates a really positive impact where we see ourselves winning and we actually can celebrate that. And you're acknowledging it too. And then I want you to really get comfortable with feedback, because we know that feedback fuels alignment. And there's a statistic that 69% of employees say that they'd work harder if their efforts were recognized. And when we create and take the time to create feedback loops, and we take the time to seek and ask, right? What's working? What's not? What more do we want? What less do we want? How do we know we're going to have it when we have it? All of those. Where do we want to adjust so that we hit our targets? What's important about that? What will be different for us when we do that? When we can ask those questions and we're gathering that feedback, and for you as the leader to just be the one asking the question, but not interjecting at all, let your people bring it to you. That's huge for them, because if they're accustomed to sitting and waiting for you to tell them, this stops that and it gives them the chance to speak up, which is super helpful and so important. So get your feedback loops and get that feedback generating it on the regular, because that fuels alignment and it helps us see that we're all rowing in the same direction. And if you need to, use visual tools, because visuals often can solidify the abstract values that are intangible. And I want you to, they might be intangible, but we want to take them to the tangible, and the visual can help. But you also have people that hear and people that see and perceive different than and so you want to honor all types of personalities at the table and give them some visual tools, right? Like, what if when you align and you've got your cultural values that you want, what if you have those as a culture board on the wall and in shared spaces where people can see it? When I go in and do strategic planning, every group that I work with, we create our core pillars, and they have their core pillars, and then they're up and around so that we know these are the core pillars. These are the values and the cultural norms that we want to create in our workplace, that we're expecting from others. And we create that visually. Why is that important? Well, because again, people see things. It's showing that, and they internalize it different than just hearing it. That's one. It's a reminder on the wall that, oh, this is who we are and this is what we want to be known, seen, and celebrated for. But it's also a great way and a simple representation of the goals that you have and the targets that you're going for, so we can keep the dialogue going. Visual is huge, and it's just so easy to do. So now we're going to talk about one of my favorite things as we bring this in for a close today. I want to talk about the bold conversations that you're going to start having to help shape the culture that you say that you want. Because it's not about culture, what you preach. It's not about that. It's what you permit. And you've heard me say we teach people how to treat us, and culture will create itself, whether you direct it or not. So if you're not willing to have bold conversations and set those expectations, then you can't expect to have bold results from people. If you're not going to have a bold conversation about the culture that we want. And I have people say this to me all the time. Hey, Tam, you talk about bold conversations and it feels like, are we angry in these bold conversations? Do we need to be? Like, why does it always have to be bold? Okay, well, call it direct, call it upfront, call it a bottom line. I don't care what you call it. I think they're bold and they're necessary. And why not name it what you name it? It's the same thing that I'll go in and tell a leader, you've got a dysfunctional team, and what do you want to do with that? And they're like, oh, don't tell me my team's dysfunctional. Isn't that too direct? No, I'm going to tell you your team's dysfunctional, because aren't you bringing me in to come in and help you transform your team into the high producing team that you want, communicating with impact? That's what I'm passionate about. Please, yes, let's do that. But that requires having bold conversations. And I was working with a group a couple of months ago that was struggling with one specific key individual who was not communicating effectively and who was not setting the goals. And when goals would be set, they weren't managing their teams that they led to actually achieve the goals. And it was requiring me to go in and have some really bold conversations. And this individual got really uncomfortable. And I watched them kind of shut down. I'm like, okay, so I'm noticing that you're shutting down. And they were just like, I just need to process through because I don't think I'm doing the things that you say. I'm like, okay, show me where you're not. And they were able to uncover, okay, yes, I haven't had those meetings. Yes, I haven't set those goals as clearly as you say that you want them set, but are they clear enough? I said, well, I don't know. Is your team achieving these goals? Well, no, they're not. Okay, then how would you answer your very own question, right? Those are the bold conversations that I'm willing to have. And I want you to be willing to have them too. It doesn't mean it has to be about conflict. It just means that we're going to confront the very thing that we say that we have. And maybe it's not, but I want you to practice having bold conversations because how you do things, your team is watching. So how you as leader address complacency in the workplace is going to impact the team and the culture that you're wanting to shape. How you address having bold conversations, how you as leader address the cultural breakdowns that happen, the gossiping or the behaviors that don't support the values that we have on our wall, right? When we have those things happening, it's up to you to have the conversations and empower your other leaders to also have the bold conversations to address those. Practice, practice, practice having bold conversations. They're not scary. You can even frame it up this way. You can say, I'd like to request that we can have a bold conversation, Joe. And Joe's going to be like, okay, what's that mean? Well, bold conversation is I want to be direct about some of the things and behaviors that I'm seeing, and I want your help and support on how we're going to correct them. Joe's going to say, okay. And then you're going to go into this script. So, Joe, I've noticed, insert specific behavior, and it's not aligned with the culture that we're building here. And I've got the culture on the wall because I've got our core pillars or our core values that we're honoring as part and saying this is the culture that we want, which is, it's not aligned with the culture that we're building here, and which is this specific value. I'm going to identify that value. Let's talk about how we can fix this together. Not what are you going to do about it, Joe? Simple process to have a bold conversation about a behavior that's not aligning to a value that we say that we want to have in place to shape the culture that we're wanting to build. That's it. When we have those conversations, friend, it is a game changer for you. And I would bet to say that you probably have them pretty easily, whether it's with friends or with family, but somehow in the workplace, we sometimes shut down and we don't know how to have it. And what's important to know is that you have the skill and ability. It's just whether or not you're going to practice it to get better at it, because that's what your team is wanting. Remember, you shape the culture. Every decision, every choice that you make shapes the culture, good or bad, positive or negative. So why not make the decisions and take action to shape the culture for a healthy, positive culture that we want versus the opposite, which is a negative culture or one where people are leaving and you've got high turnover rate and saboteurs in the workplace. So great leaders don't just create culture, they live it every single day. I want you to remember that. Great leaders don't just create culture, they live it every single day. So as you identify one communication habit that you could do to improve on, to better lead your culture and set the clarity of the vision of the culture, what is that? What's that one? Identify that one and write it on that piece of paper and commit to working to change it this week. And if you don't know how, that's where I want you to be in a group, have a mastermind group, have a mentor, have a peer, have somebody that you can talk through about you can reach out to me and I will share that conversation with you about how you can make that change. Then I want you to share your progress with me. My gosh, you can tag Tammy J. Bond on LinkedIn all day long and share the progress, because when we do that, we're celebrating it, and it goes deeper inside of our hearts of, look at me, I'm succeeding at this, I'm getting this, and it helps us to remember that good feeling of, okay, one step forward, let me keep going, and I'm going to celebrate it so that, and then others can see it as well. And when you acknowledge the change that you're making, your team is not going to be afraid to make change because they're watching you make the change and you're talking about it, right? So important. Just communicate, y'all. So if you really loved this episode, I would love for you to subscribe to the Leadership Sandbox podcast. I'd love for you to go to the YouTube channel, check that out as well. Subscribe there. That's where fresh content is also going up on video. And I want you to leave a review. And I want you to know that building a culture takes time and intentionality. And you have everything within you to be able to do that. You are whole, capable, creative, and resourceful to get and achieve exactly the culture that you want. The opposite is true, right? So let's create the culture we want and not stand by and watch the culture create itself without us. Thanks for joining me in the sandbox today. I know that leadership is not something you were born with. Bold conversations is not something you were born with, but it's something that you grow into, and you took time to grow into that today in the sandbox. And I am celebrating you for growing into your next level of leadership in the sandbox. Make it a great day. God bless.